Hello everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Allison.
And this is Nerd of the Week, a randomly generated fandom podcast. Allison, would you like to ask? Oh, wait, no.
I can ask the generator.
Ask the generator.
Ask the generator. Generator, please tell us whatever is our word this week.
Yeah, the sass.
The word of the week is beneficiary.
Beneficiary. It's a fun word to say.
It's a long word.
It is a long word.
Beneficiary. 6 syllables.
Mm-hmm. What do you think Google says the definition is?
I think it is a person who is receiving of some sort of inheritance or other gift of support.
Close. A person who derives advantage from something, especially a trust, will, or life insurance policy.
Oh.
I think this is like the most solid definition of beneficiary that I've seen.
I feel like it's also pretty well defined because like legal terms and stuff.
Right. But like for the most part, like they're always like really odd or use the word in the definition. But this one's like short, succinct. It makes sense. It did not give me a example sentence though, and I am very depressed about it. Like,
why? Google.
Right?
Google, come on. Let's make our own sentence real quick.
There was a mysterious benefactor who helped out her beneficiary. Steve, that would be a Google sentence.
I think that's on par for what Google would say.
Mm-hmm. So,
tell me your thing.
I'm going to do my best. This feels like a book report. To recount.
In this report, I will tell you what I'm going to say.
In the next 3 pages, I'm going to talk for a really long time with a bunch of extra words because the page count is 3 minimum, but required 5 pages. About 1800s French literature. So I am going to do my best to recount The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas.
Ooh, okay.
It was one of the first classic literature books that I chose to read on my own. Instead of in high school when they're like, you should read this and become cultured. And you're like, I don't want to. I picked this. I didn't know that Dumas was the writer for The Three Musketeers until after I'd finished Count of Monte Cristo. And everyone's like, why did you start with Count of Monte Cristo? Three Musketeers is better or like easier to read. And I was like,
I was forced to try and read Three Musketeers in French class in French, and it did not go well.
That's aggressive.
Yeah.
Gosh. And like, they're not short books. Dumas was not a succinct writer. He goes on forever. I ended up reading, because there's a bunch of different translations, but the one that I read, I remember reading the foreword, and the guy was like, this is the best translation of The Count of Monte Cristo by Dumas that's ever been written. And I'm like, did you write the translation? Oh, you did. Okay,
you did.
So therefore it's the best. I got you.
Usually the forewords are written by someone else.
Right. Yeah, and this one was not. However, it was a pretty solid translation, and have
you read the original?
I don't speak French, so I cannot say for certain that.
I'm sorry, I'm being very aggressive here. I'll let you talk.
That's okay. Please be aggressive. My substance isn't super great. But I had read this first. I still, to this day, haven't read Three Musketeers because of how long it is and how long Count of Monte Cristo was. And God, it was long. It was thousands of pages, but it's really, really good.
What?
Yeah, like long. Like not,
oh my God.
It is a book, or like a doorstopper of a book. And that one was like really small text and like a like condensed version, because I don't do things by halves, and I refuse to read the annotated version first, because they're like, here's an easier to digest book if you don't want one that's going to take you 6 years to read. But I was like, nah, I'll just read the whole thing, because like I want to know all the things. And it took me several months to read, but it was good. It was written in 1844, I think. And it's a French novel by Dumas, who wrote a bunch of other stuff, most famously this one and Three Musketeers. I love his portrait. If you ever just look him up on Wikipedia, he has like the best like floofy hair ever. And I don't really know much about Dumas himself other than the fact that
he's charming.
Right? I like his photo. He gives
He
good
looks
vibes.
like he could be like a Disney cartoon.
Right? Yes.
Like the jovial uncle or something. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I'm so sorry. I keep interrupting you. Not even got to the story yet.
That's okay. He I think it's cool he got started writing for like plays for theaters and doing like short like one acts and stuff. He had a play like Henry III and His Court that he was published when he was like 27 years old, which like that's impressive. Writing is hard. And like prolific writer, like put out a lot of stuff for like magazines and things like that. But this one specifically follows Edmond Dantes, probably Dantes. And it's like this amazing revenge story where it's right around the time of Napoleon. So I think that's like 1815, 1820s. Time history is not on my side, but it's for early 1800s. And Napoleon has escaped Elba, and Edmund has his ship, the Pharaon, spelled like Pharon. I am going to butcher every name in here, and I very much apologize.
It's okay. Just speak your truth. Whatever you feel the name is, just say it.
Speak my truth. Oh, no. So Edmund's captain had passed away on the ship while they were docking at Marseille, and the ship's owner made Edmund the next captain. And so on his deathbed, his captain had told him that he needed to deliver a package to General Bertrand, who was exiled with Napoleon. I don't know if Bertrand was a real person or not, or if he's just like, this is historical fiction. But probably is a real person. And then he also wanted him to get a letter from Elba to some guy in Paris. So Edmund and his colleague, whose name is Danglars, Danglars. So I'm thinking it's Danglar. Maybe it's Danglar. Very, very jealous of how quickly Edmund like rose to the ranks. Edmund is constantly described as classically handsome and just very charismatic, and people just click with him and like him a lot. And Dingler is not one of those kind of guys. And so he's jealous, and he's fearful that his own employment will be at stake if Edmund continues to rise through the ranks. So on the eve of his wedding Dante's wedding to his fiancée, Mercedes, Danglars meets a gentleman named Mondango.
That's a great name.
Right. It's Fernand Mondango, and they're at a cabaret, and they're like basically like plotting how are they going to denounce or get Edmund publicly shamed so that they can like get him out of the way. Mondego, I don't remember why Mondego doesn't like him the most, but Mondego is Mercedes' cousin in some regards. And also because it was like 1800s, I was like, I'm pretty sure he wants to marry her because but also he doesn't want anyone marrying Mercedes. So then Edmund is in that list of people. So he's like, yeah, of course I'll help you. And so they want to accuse him of being a traitor and a Napoleon apologist or whatever. So supporter. Yeah, a traitor to the state because Napoleon at this point had been denounced and told never to come back. So like he, supporting Napoleon was not in French style at the time. So
go away and never come back.
Go away. That's basically what they did to Napoleon after all the nonsense he pulled off. They were like, meh, go live on this island for the rest of your life. And Napoleon was like, no, I refuse. So
nah, bro, not gonna do that.
Lol, I'm gonna escape and then do it again. That is my knowledge of French history, or Napoleon specifically.
Cool.
So they set up a trap for Edmund, and I think there's another dude, and his name is Caderus, Caderousse. Unclear pronunciation, but he's jealous, but I don't remember exactly why, but he doesn't want to like completely peg Edmund as a traitor because traitors are like typically like hung, and he's like, look guys, that's too far. Like just because you're jealous of him doesn't mean that we shouldn't, or like that we should like completely condemn this man to death. Like we should find something else. But unfortunately, Caderus gets really, really drunk at the party and then is like completely useless. So he's just like passed out like on a armoire or something, and they manage to continue with this plot of getting him trapped. So he Edmund's captain is implied to be a Napoleon supporter, and so that package that he was supposed to deliver, like he gets trapped with it, and so then not knowing what it was for, what it was supposed to do, people show up, or like they get the police involved, and then Edmund is arrested. It occurs in that like they plant some more evidence than just the package that he was supposed to deliver. So it's the day of the wedding, I think, that it happens. And so while Dante is getting arrested, it's like that classic, like the villains are getting away with it, mwahaha. And then Caderus feels really bad about it, but also doesn't want to be accused of being a part of like bringing Napoleon back, so he just does it. Meanwhile, there's a deputy crown prosecutor in Marseille who's named Villefort, which as I'm like going through this, I'm realizing that like Dumas is doing a really good job of saying like kind of indicating which guys are sus with like the names like vilify, Villefort, and like danglers looking almost exactly like the word danger.
Would that work in French as well?
That I don't know, but like they're the same names, I would think, and then they just move them over to English. Reader, if you know, let me know if they're the same. But I feel like they're the same because like they have like all the reader listener. Oh God, it's been a long night.
So now we're reading podcasts. Okay,
read the podcast. Yeah, we here at Nerd of the Week, we've invented a new form of podcasting, and it's called reading.
I'm so sorry. Please go on.
Please constantly make fun of me.
The tale some more.
Please constantly make fun of me. Villefort is the last person in this line of Edmund trying to prove himself, who is the one who could have proven that Edmund is not a traitor, because he has the letter that explains like everything, and he reads the letter. But if he destroys the letter and then he pegs Edmund as a supporter, they would be able to capture Bertrand, and then it would advance his own political career. And it also was addressed to Villefort's father, who would peg him as a traitor. So Villefort destroys this letter from Elba and basically functionally just nails in the coffins for Edmund. And it's rough to read because like he's like, oh yeah, we'll get you out of this, don't worry, totally fine. And then he realizes what's happening, and then it will like get his father in trouble. And then he's like, the next kind of scene goes to Edmund being like sentenced, and him just being realized he's getting life without trial and imprisonment. And so he's stuck on it's like a prison island, chateau, and it's D''LF. I don't know how to pronounce that, but it's got the like, what's the island in? It's like a prison island, basically, is what
Alcatraz?
It looks like. Alcatraz, yeah. It looks like. Thank you. I can't think of words today. But so basically, he gets sent to a prison island. So he's there for a long time. I think it's in total 14 years that he's prisoned on this island. And the first 6 years, he's literally like left in solitary confinement. And Edmund's like on the verge of suicide right before like he's about to jump off a cliff. He meets the Mad Priest, who is this like middle-aged Italian guy who had dug an escape tunnel that accidentally got into his cell and not out like he thought. So he kind of like shows up there instead.
Oops.
And his name's like Abby Freya, something like that. But basically, he used to be a priest and a scholar, and he was imprisoned during some political upheaval and before all of this. And something about unification of Italy. I don't really remember why he was imprisoned. Not really pertinent to the plot.
Okay.
But basically, he keeps Edmund from killing himself. And so he becomes Edmund's mentor. So they leave that tunnel and then they like hide it, and then they'll go and talk. And so Edmund wasn't like upper class, but he was like that like middle class situation where he could have become into upper class, which is part of the reason a lot of people didn't like him too, was like he was like of the people and not like the upper echelon. And then so now he's getting cultured, and basically Abby teaches him language and history and math and all the things that you need to know to be a gentleman. And then he, right over the latter half of the Edmund's imprisonment, he tells them about the island of Monte Cristo, which is where he hid this like a crap metric ton of money, like an absurd like the thing that you want to happen to you in your life amount of money, like some rich uncle dies and then you have just a crap ton of money and will be fine for the rest of your life.
Okay.
And Edmund's like, okay, ramblings of a crazy guy, but all right, fair enough. He's been my friend for like the last forever, so totally fine. So Abby dies, and then I don't remember. I think Dante escapes. He's able to and once Abby passes, because it took a while for him to go, he had a couple of attacks. I think it was like heart attacks. Medicine wasn't super great in the early 1800s, so it's not really well described. And I don't remember exactly how he dies, but he passes, and then taking advantage of the fact that they have to get rid of the body, Dante takes his place in the burial sack And then, so he gets thrown to sea instead of Abby. And then Abby was in his solitary confinement because Dante was not really interacted with a lot. So it was going to be a while before they found the body in that space. So he's able to get, or he's thrown to sea, and then he manages to get like a knife or like something sharp with him, and then frees himself, and then, swims to a nearby island where he is rescued by some smuggler ships that were just happening to, I guess, pass by, Deus Ex Machina style. And they're like, hey, you escaped from prison and we're a bunch of scoundrels. Come with us. And so he has to be dropped off on the island of Monte Cristo. And they're like, why do you want to go there? It's just a rock. Like, it's not anything exciting. And he's like, just take me there for a second. So he goes to go see, and then my favorite scene in this whole book is he finds it. He finds the gold. It's exactly where Abby told him it was going to be. There's a little bit of digging. There's like that moment of uncertainty where he's like digging a little bit. He can't find it. And then all of a sudden he hits like a chest and he opens it, and it's just like diamonds and gemstones and like billions of dollars of Roman crowns and just francs and like all sorts of money. And he gets up and he goes to the edge of the island. He like leaves it alone and he's like staring off into the sea. And then he goes back and he looks at it. And then he goes back and he looks out at the sea. And then he goes back. Like he can't process it. It's so well written. It was like, I cracked up. It's unfathomable. I cracked up because I was like, I feel like that's a very human reaction to finding like a life-changing amount of money. And so he ends up, I think it was the smugglers who helped him, or another group, a ship that comes by. But I think it's the smugglers. And he pretends to be from somewhere else. I think he pretends to be English, and it takes some of the treasure with him because obviously it's so much that he can't carry by himself. But he goes to, he takes the diamonds. They bring him, I think it's to Marseille actually, but some area, and he buys a yacht, and then he gets all the treasure, and then he starts to set himself up for basically like making himself like this really big name. And he calls himself the Count of Monte Cristo, and gives himself the title of count and tries to establish himself in the government. And he happens to run into Catarus, who is he's like on his travels and like starting to build himself up, and it just happens to be like a chance meeting. And Catarus is married but not doing well. Wait,
have we met this fellow yet before?
Catarus is the one who got really drunk, who was not.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was is living in poverty now, and he talks to Edmund about regretting him not helping this guy, and Catarus doesn't recognize Edmund because it's been 14 years. And he's like, I got a guy killed and I feel really bad for it. And so he's living in this terrible squalor. And so Edmund gets Dangler and Mondego's names of, these are the guys that betrayed me. He finds out that his father died of self-inflicted starvation because of the shame of his dad or his son being a Napoleon cider. And then Mercedes was married to Mondego, so unfortunately her cousin, and she had a son named Albert. And so he gets basically like what has happened through Catarus. He finds out that Mondego's like doing really, really well, and Dangler is putting on an air of doing really well, but Catarus hints that there's a strong possibility that he's embezzling money or doing something wrong with money. So all of this sets him up for his revenge arc and his villain era.
Yeah. All right, a book is long though when there's different eras of the people in it.
Yeah. So the second half of the book is him going to Versailles and plotting his revenge. And so he appears as this wealthy count. He targets Mondego and Danglars and Villefort, the guy who could have exonerated him but didn't, and sets up a wild series of schemes that basically shame Danglars into killing himself because he shows that his that he was embezzling, even though he wasn't. Danglars was going under, but was actually trying to choose the honorable route. But things keep getting set up, and the pieces fall into place where he realizes everything's going to fall on me. I'm going to go to prison forever. He absolutely destroys this man's entire reputation. Edmond Dante is the long con, I'm about to mess up this man's whole career type of scenario. And he partially does that by becoming the benefactor of a lot of people with all of the money. So that's where the beneficiary comes in. So Edmond Dantes becomes the benefactor to a lot of people, including Mercedes, so his lover, who is now married to Mondego. He ends up saving Albert, who is Mercedes and Fernand's son. At one point, I think it's Villefort's daughter. She is a lesbian and she wants to go be with her lover, but because it's 1800s France, it's very frowned upon. So he sets it up in a way that he's like, look, I am going to mess up your name, but it's also going to bring your father great shame. And she's all for it. So he's so she and her girlfriend get set up in another part of Europe. I think they end up going to Spain. And so they are living on his money for the rest of their life because they got to basically say, screw you, Dad, and then get to go and end up living somewhere on cushy money for the rest of their life. The revenge arc is so well done. And at the end, I always mess up the ending with the movie too, because there's so many movie adaptations of this, and because of how long it is, a movie does not do this book justification. But I think he gets to live happily ever after, and he gets to I think he ends up with a woman. Him and Mercedes realizes what he did toward the end, and they have a conversation.
You know what you did.
Yeah, and they have a conversation, and she's like, I just can't. I'm going to take care of Albert, blah, blah, blah. But he ends up with a woman named Haiti, and he gets to have his revenge and have his identity revealed as what happened, and so he gets the vindication and all of the things, and he gets to have his peace and all that. And then the last line of the book is all human wisdom is contained in these two words, wait and hope. So if you wait long enough, you'll get your revenge. But
definitely the long
con. But it's really clever the way everything lays out. It's super I enjoyed reading it. I was 16 or 17 when I read it the first time, and I was like, I wish to be this clever. But do recommend. Maybe you don't have to read the 3,000 page version. The abridged version's pretty well, and the movies do. There's a bunch of them. There's constantly various movies. I don't know how many there are total. At least, based on a quick Google search, there's at least 10.
Wow.
Which makes sense. There's a Turner Classic Movies one that's pretty good, but it's solid. And it's the greatest revenge story ever. And that's what I have for Beneficiary.
Excellent. Well done. It sounds intriguing. It sounds like I would like
I think
it.
you would. It definitely is long, and it definitely suffers from being written in the 1800s. But the best translation...
Well, I would say anything about this podcast that we do is it's encouraged me to actually go back and read more books.
Hooray!
So,
I'm always a proponent of reading more books. However, the best translation of it read pretty well. And if it can keep my 16-year-old brain's attention, then it's probably...
I can probably keep my late 20s also brain. Or maybe I'm just too sleepy and I'll fall asleep.
You could listen to it on audiobook.
There you go. Then I can multitask. And that's what we need to do in our life is multitask.
Yeah, it's true.
Perfect. Well, it sounds wonderful. Thanks for bringing it.
Absolutely. And this ends my book report on The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas.
We will now take any questions. There will be a brief reception outside in the lobby.
I have brought snacks.
Make sure you pick up some postcards and posters. There will be a book signing afterwards.
I didn't write the book, nor did I translate it, but I will sign your book for you if you ask.
Bring us any book and we will sign it. That is our guarantee.
Absolutely.
Oh, no. It's still not a pyramid scheme.
It is not. But I will draw you a pyramid if you ask me for one.
That's what part of the signature
Yeah,
could
there you
be.
go.
Yeah. All right. Is this the time when I tell you a quote, or do you want to talk at people about social media first?
You tell me a quote, and then I tell people to tell us if they know where the quote's from on social media.
Okay. I first have to apologize for my quote. It doesn't actually say the word beneficiary in it. I know.
That's
Lame.
okay.
But it has the idea of beneficiary about it.
All right, I will accept
And
this.
I promise that it's imbued in the media it comes from is beneficiary.
Got it.
So
It gives the vibes.
yes.
All right. I'm ready.
Hashtag just beneficiary things. All right. Here we go. You're a pack of vultures, knives out and beaks bloody. Well, you're not getting bailed out, not this time. She has decided definitively not to renounce the inheritance.
Huh.
I know you know this.
It sounds really, really familiar.
I'll read it to you again later, but I know you know it. In your heart of hearts, you know where this is from.
Okay. Well, if you know where it's from, reader, feel free to get a hold of us on social media. We have a Facebook, a Twitter account. We have YouTube that I'm up to date on, and an Instagram. And if you look up the hashtag Nerd of the Week or at Nerd of the Week, we would be happy to hear
Or
from you.
hashtag just beneficiary things.
Hashtag just beneficiary things or NOTWP. Either of those hashtags work. We also have a TikTok at Vampire Sheep. The E's in sheep are spelled with 3s instead of E's. And sometimes we post little snippets and shorts on there. So feel free to watch those. There's 7 of them now.
Hooray, 7.
It'll take you all of a minute to watch because they're all TikToks. Yeah. So
Cool.
while I ponder this thing that I absolutely should know in my heart of hearts, what did you bring,
you
Allison?
ponder, weak and weary. What is that? A knocking at my door?
Quote the Raven, nevermore.
All right, this is hashtag Uber Literary Podcast today.
I'm really impressed with that right there. So we're doing good. We're cultured.
Exactly. And we're going to be even more cultured because in the most twisted fate, I have also brought a piece of classic literature to us today.
Oh, that's exciting.
I have brought Great Expectations by Charles Dickens.
Wow.
I have fond memories of, again, from high school, much like yours.
Okay.
As using it to spite my literature teacher.
Why was it a spite to literature teacher?
So it was literally on the summer reading list as an option of things we could read. I think it was we had to pick 2 books to read over the summer. And I was literally the only one in the class who picked to read this one. I don't remember what the other choices were, but no one else picked this one. But I loved it, and it was amazing. And then we basically had to like use these books for the first half of the semester to write all of our like different prompts for AP literature stuff for.
Yeah. Okay.
Like just to practice for the test, basically.
Yeah.
And my teacher like really wanted me to just find a different book to write about because it'd make it easier for everybody to know what I was talking about. And I refused. I wrote all of my essays on Great Expectations.
Hell yeah.
Because I want it to be different, and I want it to be the best. And you know what? I got a 5 on the AP Literature exam, so take that.
Take that, Allison's AP Literature teacher.
Yeah. I had great expectations and succeeded.
Heck yeah. Hashtag just great expectation things.
All right. So anyway, I did reread this in part. And then I Cliff Notes the end of it because I didn't have time to read the whole thing.
God bless Cliff Notes.
Cry.
Thank you, whoever came up with Cliff Notes. You got me through most of my English classes.
But I did read the whole thing for English class. It was just for this recording that I didn't read the whole thing. Just to be clear.
I skimmed Cliff Notes because there was no way I was reading 3,000 pages.
Yeah. Yeah. And this one is only 508 pages. So about half as long as your story. But I will still probably mess it up just as thoroughly.
Woo!
You did a good job. That wasn't meant to be mean.
No, I'm certain I have some details wrong, and I definitely only like skimmed the revenge arc. But I feel like you should read the revenge arc. I shouldn't give it in like glorious detail.
Okay.
Anyway,
All right. So anyway, Great Expectations opens in England in a graveyard with the main character Pip, it's Christmas Eve, and he's sitting there on his parents' headstones, and he kind of ponders that he never knew them, like they died when he was really young, and he was brought up by his older sister, and it says in the book, quote, by hand, and he says, and what I think they meant by hand is that I was so thoroughly beaten all the time that I knew the back of her hand so well, or something like that. So poor boy was a bit abused growing up. But he was allowed to go to the churchyard and like pay homage to his parents, I guess.
how kind of them.
Yes. He says he was quite surprised and startled when suddenly he was like pulled up by his collar off of the gravestone, and there was a convict who suddenly had appeared. He knows it was a convict because there's like this prison ship that's stationed nearby, like out in the harbor. So basically it was a ship hoping that the convicts wouldn't escape, but lo and behold, this one did. And he also had a chain with one of those like big heavy metal balls around his ankle. So like kind of ye-olde tracking device.
Ye old tracking device. Ball and chain.
Yes. But the convict says, like, you have to get me some food, and also, do you know a blacksmith? And the child's like, oh, as a matter of fact, I live with a blacksmith, because his sister's husband, Joe, is the town blacksmith. So the convict says, all right, you have to get me a file and bring these back to me first thing tomorrow, or else one of my compatriots will come and kill you. And he's not so benevolent as I am. Apparently this compatriot, he doesn't actually exist, but it was used as a terrifying way to get the boy to do what he wants. So anyway, Pip, he's rightfully scared. He goes home and he knows like what he has to do. So like all evening he's like trying to slip pieces of bread into his pockets and like be covert about things, and everyone's like, oh, Pip is all dejected for some reason, but it's really he's just being sneaky and trying not to get caught. And he's also feeling super guilty about this because he's like, I didn't feel like I was stealing from my sister, but I did feel like I was stealing from Joe.
Oh.
And Joe is like his like compatriot, his friend, and even though Joe is like so old, like could be his father basically, but like they're buddies. So Pip breaks up the next morning, Christmas Day, real early, and slips out of the house. He's stolen a file from Joe and then takes all this food that he managed to collect over the evening. And he goes out and meets the convict, except the first person he comes across is not the same convict. It's a different convict. So apparently there's two that are out on the loose here.
Oh, no.
Pip manages to be like, oh, excuse me, sir, sorry, and just runs off. Finds the real convict that he had been talking to before, gives him the food, and he's like, the convict looked like a wild dog scarfing its meal. So, like, this poor guy had not had a decent meal for a long, long time.
Oh.
And he's, like, really grateful and, like, but, like, in a gruff, convict-y kind of way. But he basically is like, you've done a good thing, and I'll never, let anything bad come to you, or something like that. And Pip says, oh, but I ran into the other one that you were talking about, which, of course, the convict wasn't expecting anyone else to be about. And he's like, oh, what? Someone else? Now, it sounds like this convict knows who the other guy is. As soon as he's done filing this ball and chain off of his ankle, he goes like, I'm gonna go get him. I'm gonna kill him, blah, blah, blah. And Pip, like, doesn't know what to make of this and runs on home.
I mean, that's fair. I probably would have just booked it, too.
Yeah. So once he's home, Pip, like, continues to feel really, really guilty about all of this. Like, it's just weighing on him, this terrible thing that he's done to steal all this food in the file and take it to the convict. And he knows he shouldn't have done it, but he felt like he had no other choice. Because, like, he's 7, and if someone threatens to kill you, I think you're probably going to do what was told, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, the sister has, like, all of her friends from town over for dinner, and they're all, like, stuffy old people who always say things to Pip of, like, you should be so grateful, and, like, here's this story of something awful we heard, and don't let this happen to you, boy. Mm-hmm. And just, like, Pip is sitting there in silence, literally not doing anything, and constantly being reprimanded by these adults for things
Rude.
he's not done, nor was intending to do.
So rude.
And it's just, like, I don't think that ever happened to me as a child, but I feel like I know what it would feel like.
Yeah.
Or maybe, like, it did happen to me, but, like, in a more mild situation. It's just like, why are you telling me this? I wouldn't have done XYZ thing. So,
yeah.
Like, it's a very put down the children kind of dynamic, and it's not fun.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But Pip survives that Christmas Eve dinner. Now, at one point, he is, like, so distraught of his guilt that he, like, kind of jumps up from the table and just, like, has to rush outside. As he's going out there, he runs into a police officer, though, who's come in to be like, hey, we're looking for a couple of convicts, and we need a blacksmith. And Pip is like, oh, no, they found the file, and they think it's Joe who's done this. But as it turns out, they just needed to have, like, their bayonets sharpened or something before they went out on the hunt. So while Joe is working on all their bayonets, the sister's, like, giving them wine, and Pip makes some comment in his head in the book, basically of, like, and if they had been so good at their job as they were of consuming wine, then there wouldn't be a convict in the land. Or something snarky like that. And then I don't know why they decide to do this, but the police officers, like, offer the men and Pip to go out with them hunting for this convict.
Oh, okay.
And everyone's
Come,
like,
small
yeah,
child.
we want to go.
I got nothing else going on this Saturday. Let's go.
Yeah, like, just go on a manhunt,
It's fine. Just manhunt things.
Yeah. So basically they take Pip out. He's sitting on Joe's shoulders. They're going through, and they very easily find the convict. He's in a tussle with the other convict, and the other convict says something like, he's gonna kill me, he's trying to kill me, and he, like, comes up with 2 black eyes, and the other guy says, it wasn't me who started it was all him. Anyway, both convicts are taken back into custody. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to remember. Pip was worried that his convict would be mad to see Pip there, but I believe he didn't see him.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly. I hope that's correct. Anyway, nothing bad comes to Pip of that, but he does carry this guilt with him for the rest of his life, basically.
All right, fair.
But the convicts are taken back to the ship, and they're going to be, like, done away with somehow. Now, time goes on. Pip grows a little bit older. He mentions that he's eventually going to be apprenticed to Joe as, like, a blacksmith, and, like, that's what his whole life was leading up to. However, one day, one of the sister's friends, whose name is Pumblechook, Mr. Pumblechook.
That's a great name.
Yes. He his profession, I think he like sells seeds or something like that for farmers. But he like thinks of himself very highly, and he has this really nice prominent storefront in the main town. And he says that he heard from the rich old lady in town, Mrs. Havisham, that she would like to have a young boy come and play at her house, which sounds so suspicious.
Sus.
And Pumblechook says, and didn't I know just the young boy?
Oh, Lord.
If he's not grateful now, then he never will be.
Oh, Lord.
And Pip is just like, I'm always grateful. What are you talking about?
I'm a good egg.
Yes. But basically, Pumblechook mentioned that Pip would probably be available for this engagement. So he's set to go meet Mrs. Havisham the next day. His sister like throws him into the bathtub and scrubs him until his face is red. Poor guy. Yeah. Dresses him up in his best suit, which is not very good, but better than his normal clothes.
Yeah.
And he gets sent off to meet Mrs. Havisham. So Mrs. Havisham's giant mansion and estate is called Sadis House, which Sadis, I think in Latin, means enough or something like that. Like when it was first named, it was like, this is all we could ever need. It's everything. But it's kind of taken on a different meaning now, as Mrs. Havisham has let it fall into a huge state of disrepair. Pip is greeted at the door by a young girl who's approximately his same age, named Estella, and she is incredibly mean to him.
Yeah.
And like makes fun of him, like, oh, these are the clothes you're wearing? Okay, that's cool.
Doesn't have
But
any
basically-
others. Leave him alone. Pip's a good
Yeah,
noodle.
he's trying. He's trying his best. But so she's just kind of mean and takes him upstairs to meet Mrs. Havisham. She is this old lady who's wearing this old wedding dress, and she has one shoe on and one shoe is like waiting next to her dresser, waiting to be put on, and there's like a bridal veil strewn on the floor, and all the clocks in the house are stopped at 9:20. And basically everything looks like it hasn't been touched for forever. And Mrs. Havisham like gets to know Pip and like asks him questions about himself of like, what do you do? And he's like, I am a child. I do nothing.
Right.
And she's like, what will you do? And he's like, I will be a blacksmith, ma'am. So just like kind of this whole questioning thing. And then she calls Estella back in and she says, Pip, what do you think of Estella? And Pip loves Estella from the first sight. He's like, she's beautiful. And Miss Havisham is like probing and being snaky. And she's like, but isn't she so mean to you? Hasn't she ripped your heart out? And Pip is like, yeah, she's a little mean. And Miss Havisham like says something whispering to Estella of like, you can rip his heart out, dear.
Oh,
you know,
God.
something mischievous like that. Anyway,
What a
she's
strange
like, so,
lady.
yeah, she's a weird egg. We'll get into more of why she's a weird egg in a bit. But anyway, she says, so Pip, you haven't played for me yet. What would you like to play at? And he's like, I don't know. I don't usually play.
Yeah.
And she's like, well, how about cards? You can play cards with Estella. So they play some card game, and Estella makes fun of him for calling the jacks as knaves.
Okay.
And he feels ashamed of like, well, why didn't Joe ever teach me the proper name for these cards? And Estella's much better at the game than he is, so he royally loses. And then Miss Havisham says, I think that's enough for now. Come back next week and we'll do the same thing again.
Oh.
And Pip is like, he doesn't really know what to think about it. Estella walks him out of the house. She says, do you actually think I'm beautiful? And he's like, yes. And she smacks him on the face
Oh.
and he starts crying. And she says, why are you crying?
Because you hit him in the face. What the heck?
And he's like, I don't know. And then he says, I won't cry for you ever again.
Oh, okay.
And he says, that was a lie. I will cry for her many times. So anyway, that was his afternoon at Miss Havisham's. Now, what
God.
I love the most about this boy, he goes home. And instead of telling people like what the place was actually like or what actually happened, he says, oh, Miss Havisham is delightful. And she has a carriage that's been put into her room that she sits upon, like, rather than having a bed or something like that. And they're like, well, what did you do? And he said, well, there were dogs. We watched a dog fight. And then after that, we waved silk flags and we ate cake. And it was just like this extraordinary thing that he comes up with, which I just adore. You have this completely extraordinary experience and you make a completely other extraordinary experience to tell someone about. His point of doing that he explains to the reader, is he didn't want Miss Havisham to be misunderstood if he were to describe what the house was actually like in complete disrepair. And so he wanted to make it sound like a really good thing and like she's doing well for herself. So like he's kind of standing up and protecting her essentially. And everyone's like, all right, Pip, well, you've got a good thing going here. You have to be on your best behavior because maybe she'll like make you a benefactor of something one day. And he's like, yeah, I guess I should be good. Okay. So the next week he goes on back and the same thing basically happens, except apparently it's Miss Havisham's birthday. She doesn't acknowledge it, but other people in her family are acknowledging it. So there's like a party out in the garden, but not including Miss Havisham. And all these people, they're just kind of like loitering about and like making remarks, and they kind of like give Pip dirty looks of like, why is this young weird boy here? But he goes back up, sees Miss Havisham again. He and Estella play cards, and then Miss Havisham wants to have like a walk around the room essentially, but she's so old and like needs help walking, so she's gonna lean on Pip while she walks around. She has him go into this like adjoining room basically that's all set out with this huge grand dining table, and it has like this huge feast on it and this huge wedding cake, except it's all like covered in spider webs and moldy, and there's like rats running around and bugs and beetles, and it's just like this horrid scene. And she says, and when I die, this will be the table that they lay my body on.
Okay.
She's just so morbid. But again, like everything, it's been there for years, decades, and hasn't been touched or cleaned at all. And this food is just molding and decaying away, and she's not done anything about it. But she likes to walk around this room around the table. Then everybody comes up from the party to like pay their respects to her, and she like just dismisses them. They like say nice things, and she's like, why did you even bother coming? Like she doesn't care for other people at all. As Pip is leaving for the day, he's just like snooping around the garden a little bit, and he looks in one of the windows of the house, and there's this other boy in there, and the boy like looks all excited like, oh, another person. And he comes out and he's like, hey, do you want to like fight with me? And by that he means like have a boxing match, not like fight angrily, I guess.
Yeah, okay.
So they have this boxing match, and Pip, because he's the son of a blacksmith basically, is really strong and kind of scruffy.
This makes sense.
And he like squarely beats this boy in every single round. But this boy, he's like so happy-go-lucky. He's like, this was capital. What a wonderful fight this was. We were well matched, and you really got the better of me. But it was great fun, old chap. Like just
early,
this
like
toxic
18th
positivity
century
almost.
himbo.
Yeah. But so Pip is like, okay, you're weird, but I guess that was fun. I don't know. And he goes right on back home.
I mean, isn't that how you make friends at that age? You're weird, but I guess that was fun.
Well, that's the last time he sees this guy, though. He never sees him ever again. He says, in the future, when I went back, I looked in all the windows, but I never saw the pale gentleman ever again.
Oh, R.I.P.
So
pale
sad.
gentleman.
Yeah. So he's going back and forth like every single week to Miss Havisham's for about 6 months or so. Until finally he's old enough to become Joe's apprentice, and Miss Havisham like asks him to bring Joe one day, and Joe's like all nervous, and he's like real like country manners kind of thing, and like doesn't know how to behave in front of anyone of any sort of class.
I mean, that's fair.
Yeah, so
I don't
he's
either.
like real nervous. He refuses to like talk directly to Miss Havisham. Like Miss Havisham will ask him a question of like, and do you intend to take this boy as your apprentice? And Joe will then like look at Pip and be like, well, Pip, you know, I've always wanted to make you my apprentice, and if it's what you want, blah, 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 just like going on. And Pip is like, then talks to Miss Havisham of like, yes, he does want me as the apprentice.
Aw.
It's like just this weird triangular conversation, but they're all in the same room.
Yeah.
So Miss Havisham is like, all right, well, here's like a small allowance for you, I guess. It's not like anything that they can live on, but it's just like, thanks for coming to see me sometimes, Pip. Here's like a head start in your apprenticeship, and I'll never see you again. Goodbye. And so right after that, Joe and Pip meet up with Pumblechook, and they go to like the magistrate's office, and they like have the apprentice papers signed, which apparently is a thing that had to be done back then. And basically it says Pip is now in the service of Joe and will become a blacksmith. Hooray!
Hooray!
But all this time, Pip has been feeling like so out of place because he loves Estella, and Estella's so mean to him and like always looks down on him. And he's like, if only I could better myself. Like, if I could educate myself and like be more fancy and have good manners, like all of my problems would be solved. And he has this friend who like lives out in the country near them, whose name is Biddy. She's this kind of like plain country girl, but she's very, very smart. Her great aunt was like the headmistress of a school until she passed away. So Biddy has like a little bit of knowledge, like she can read. And Pip kind of confides in her of like his secret desires of like, I really want to better myself and can you help me? And so Biddy's like covertly been giving him tutoring lessons and like trying to teach him how to read and write. And even as he's going to the blacksmith, like at night, he still spends time studying. So he's getting a little bit better. But every single time he like stumbles in his manners or something like that, he's like, ugh, I'm not good enough. This is never going to be good enough to get Estella to like me. Like he's just constantly thinking of Estella the whole time.
She's probably not worth it, buddy, but it's okay.
Yeah, she's so mean. There's no reason that he should like her. But, oh well. And then one day, somebody has broken into the house. We never really figure out exactly who it is, but it might be like this like hired hand kind of guy who works at the forge with Joe, who's always been a little bit creepy. We think that he breaks into the house where Pip's sister is and like hits her over the head with something. And we think it was supposed to be to murder her, but she doesn't die. She just has brain damage, unfortunately. And so from then on out, she's like so nice and like she really can't like do anything on her own. She really can't even talk or use like one of her hands or anything. It's almost like she's had a stroke, but like obviously there was a scuffle. It wasn't just a stroke kind of thing. So anyway, Biddy moves in with them to like help take care of her, but then gives Pip like way more access to education. Which is great for everybody. So overall, Pip has like a better quality of life now because he's not being beaten all the time. Yeah. He's learning things and he has like some direction in life. Biddy and him have like really deep talks of like what his future is going to be and like what her future is going to be. And he starts to get kind of like, well, Biddy, you know, if I could love you, you'd be a really great wife, but I just can't. I have to love Estella. And you can tell Biddy's just like so salty about this. Like every time Pip ever brings up Estella, she's just like, well, whatever, Pip. Okay, if that's what you think.
Right.
Like, obviously Pip's not going to be good enough for Estella. So like, why not just give her up? I totally get where Biddy's coming from. And Biddy as well, she's like been, she's had more time to like read and learn herself and like acquire more and more books and literature and stuff. She's like really smart. Like she could really make a name for herself if anybody in this story could. But she's pretty content to just stay in the small town. Now one day in the forge, somebody comes along. It's a lawyer. He comes along and he's asking for Pip. And he says, you, my good friend, are about to have some great expectations.
Roll credits.
The name of the book. Apparently, this lawyer has been put under contract to keep the benefactor's name a secret, but Pip is basically set up to become a London gentleman. Like, he's gonna be rich and educated and high society, and basically he has to go to London immediately to start, like, professional tutoring and, like, live amongst the wealthy. And Pip is like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. everyone is thinking it must be Miss Havisham because they couldn't fathom like who else could this possibly be. It must be her. And for whatever reason, her just being a weird old lady just wants to keep herself a secret. The lawyer, he says, his name is Jeggings. No, what is it? Not Jeggings. That's
Like the jean leggings.
yeah, it's Jaggers.
Okay. That makes more sense. Little did we know that Jeggings was named after a character in Great Expectations.
Oh no, it's Jaggers, Mr. Jaggers.
Okay.
So anyway, Mr. Jaggers, he says, one day, eventually, your benefactor will come forward. I have advised them that this is a bad plan, but they are insistent upon it. But until that day, you are not to know who it is. You're supposed to just accept the money and go.
And
So Pip, he like goes and tells Miss Havisham, like, this great thing has happened to me. I'm so excited. And Miss Havisham is like, oh, that's wonderful. Maybe you'll run into Estella eventually. She's in Paris right now at finishing school, but when she comes back, she'll be a great beauty and you'll probably run into her again. So yay for Pip. He has that to look forward to now. Anyway, he goes on to London and it's like this whole thing of him like he has all this money and he's like spending it at all the shops to get like a new suit and like all the different fancy lad things that he'll need for going to London. And all these people who used to treat him like dirt of like, you poor boy, I can't sell things to you, so you're worthless to me. They're all like chasing him down the street of like, oh, Mr. Pip, what about such and such? Don't you want to buy this? Blah, blah, blah. And like treating him like a god, basically. So definitely showing the power dynamic of the wealthy versus the lower class. And if you have money, you can do whatever you want.
right.
So he makes his way to London. He's decided to go with a tutor whose name is Mr. Pocket, who is
Mr.
apparently
Pocket.
the cousin of Miss Havisham.
Okay.
He has a son who is about Pip's age, who, until Pip is able to finally make like the final leg of the journey to his house, he's going to stay with the son in London for a second. The son's name is Herbert, and it's the pale gentleman that he'd fought with all those years ago. Hooray!
Hello, hooray!
And they become fast friends, like best buddies. They get along with each other so well. And it's so perfect. And then they go on to Mr. Pocket's house, and like Pip, he learns very well while he's there. Mr. Pocket's house is very chaotic because they have a lot of children and none of them are very well behaved because they're all babies. And Mrs. Pocket doesn't take much control of the children. Like, she has nursemaids who she expects to take control of them,
Okay.
but they're not always there. So sometimes the children just run wild and it's crazy. Pip meets a few other people while he's in London. Of course, there's Mr. Jaggers, who he is like a really, really shrewd lawyer. Sometimes Pip goes and like watches him while he's at court, and he like intimidates everybody, like the judge, the jury, the other side, his own clients. Like, he's just a force to be reckoned with. He's an excellent, excellent lawyer. And then there's another guy who works with under Mr. Jaggers, like he's a clerk. His name is Mr. Wemmick. And while Wemmick is at the office, okay, let me just say, Wemmick has like the best work-life balance I've ever heard of. So he definitely like keeps his work at work and his home life at home.
God, I wish I could do that.
I know, he's so good at it. So like at work, he's like a little taciturn and like he knows like little minute details of every little client that comes in. And so like, without even consulting paper, if he like sees a face, he's like, oh, I know you owe me such and such amount of money by such and such date, or, oh, you're the defendant of such and such a case, you'll need to be in court on this day. Just like has it down to a T. He's very good at his job. He invites Pip to have dinner with him one day, so Pip goes over to his house. His house is like it's described as being like a regular cottage, but on the top of it, Wemmick has gone in and painted like a castle turret, like, you know, the like rectangular, I don't know what those are called. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
I don't know what that's called though. Whatever. So anyway, he's painted that like on the top of his cottage to make it look like a little miniature castle. And then he has a little stream running through his front yard, and he's made this little drawbridge to go over it. And he says, and every night at 9 p.m. I fire off the cannon. And it's just like so charming. He has this little castle and he like obsesses over it. And then he also warns Pip before he comes over. He's like, I hope you don't mind aged parents because I have one at home.
Oh.
So his dad lives with him and he's like an ancient man. I think he's like 95 years old or something. And he cannot hear, but he's so good natured. And Wemmick says, just nod at him. He loves when people nod at him. So Pip just like stands there and like nodding at him. And he's like, and I just gave him like the best bow I could. And he cackled and it was so happy and just so charming, essentially. And then Wemmick, instead of calling it like my father or hey dad, he says, hey, aged P for aged parents. And like that's how he refers to him. It's so funny. But anyway, so that's Wemmick's home life.
Okay.
Another anecdote about Wemmick, because he's so cute. He invites Pip one day. He's like, why don't you come fishing with me one day? And so Pip heads over to the castle, ready to go fishing. And Wemmick like has his fishing gear all ready. And he's like, let's just walk a little down the road. I know a good fishing spot down by the church. So they march on down there. And Wemmick's like, before we go fishing, let's just go inside the church. I need a little rest. And so they go in there and Wemmick's girlfriend is there like at the altar and there's a priest and Wemmick's like, oh, maybe I'll just get married instead. So basically he didn't want to tell Pip that he was getting married and wanted him to be his best man. He just like tricked him into coming and it's just so precious. So cute. I love Wemmick. He's a good boy. So anyway, having all his money and never having had money in the past has gotten into really awful spending habits and quickly goes into debt. And at one point, Jaggers talks to him and he's like, Pip, do you know how much you owe? And Pip is like, no. And Jaggers like, I didn't think so. It's a lot. You need to do better. And Pip is like, I'll try, sir. I'll try my hardest. And Jaggers is like, but there's not much more I can do because you're not a minor anymore. So I'm just telling you, be careful with your money, Pip. And that's basically all Jaggers can do for him. He's also, in the meantime, he kind of like goes back and forth between Mr. Pocket's house and Herbert's apartment, where he basically now is a roommate. And he's convinced Herbert to have really bad spending habits too. And poor Herbert didn't have money to begin with. And now he's in even greater debt than Pip ever was. But his grand expectations for himself, Herbert's grand expectations, that is that he wants to like be an investor in a shipping company. But as of right now, he's like just working in the back room of a counting house. And so Pip, with his infinite wealth, that is not so infinite really, comes up with this great plan with Wemmick to basically, behind Herbert's back, convince somebody in the counting house to like take notice of him and offer him like a investiture option, and somehow he like gets in with that and he actually does really, really good at his job. And so through all this secrecy and falsehood, basically Pip is able to make Herbert into this great investor, and like he actually has real money coming in. By the end of the book, he's actually on his way to Egypt to do something there with the company.
All right, fair enough.
So Herbert's done great for himself thanks to Pip's help. Pip, one day, is now sitting like just waiting around. Herbert's on some mission or something for his company, and so Pip is alone, and it's a rainy, rainy night. And he hears someone like on the stairs outside, and he's like, well, I wonder who that could be. So he goes and looks out, and it's this like real scraggly old man coming up the steps, and Pip is like, oh, sir, let me help you up here. And the man's like, are you Pip? I'm looking for Pip. And this is, of course, taken him by surprise. Like, why on earth would anyone be looking for him? He's like, I am. You want to come inside? And the guy's like, yes, I do. I must come in and I must greet you. And like the guy is like acting really, really happy to see him. And Pip is like, I don't know who you are. So the guy coming up the stairs is, in fact, the convict that all those years ago Pip had met in the graveyard. And the convict says, it was me. I was the one who was your benefactor.
Oh.
And Pip's life flashes before his eyes because he's like, what? I can't have a convict being my backer. Like, what? How is this possible? So how it's possible is that the convict got shipped off to Australia, where he actually became a decent human and has this wonderful little sheep farm. And he's like really good at trading and like negotiating prices for his wool and like does a really good job down there for himself. However, he was specifically banned from ever coming back to London. But he was so desperate to meet Pip and tell Pip of how great he had done for himself and how, like, I did everything for you. You're my gentleman. I made you. That he risked his life, literally, to come back and see Pip. So Pip is, like, distraught about all of this. He's like, first off, I don't want to be associated with you. And second off, I need to get you out of here somehow so you don't die.
Right.
And so he has to come up with this elaborate plan with Herbert and Wemmick to try and get the convict, whose name I don't remember. We're just going to refer to him as the convict. Try and get him out of London. So they have this plan where like they're going to make it seem like he's Pip's uncle and he's going like abroad for a time, but he has to get on a ship. And so they're trying to like paddle out to a ship on a rowboat late at night one night, but it's a terrible, terrible storm. They get capsized over the boat and like the convict gets really sick with pneumonia and Pip's arm is broken or something like that. Like it's not good for either of them. The convict is at that point also taken back in basically to jail, and Pip comes and visits him every single day. And like through that and like through talking to him and getting to know him a little bit better, Pip becomes a better person somehow. And instead of being so self-centered of like, I am a great gentleman and nothing is above me, he's like, oh, okay, you know, I can be a decent human and not have all the wealth in the world. Like I'm okay. And eventually the convict dies, unfortunately, from his sickness. Pip takes a while to get better, and Joe comes and visits him and nurses him back to health. And he's like, Joe, I was so cruel to you all these years, thinking that you were so low and you know, not doing well. But I see like you fit into your niche in the world, and you know, I should respect you for what you had, and like you're proud of that too, and I'm proud of you. And Pip eventually goes back basically to live with Joe, and you know, realizes he's not really as big a deal as he thought he was, but he's okay with it now. You know, he knows how to make a living for himself, and he's okay with it.
Okay.
How Miss Havisham and Estella kind of all fit back into this. So the reason Miss Havisham had her life in tatters basically is that the day of her wedding, she got a note from her fiance that was like, the wedding is off. I'm not marrying you.
Oh.
So basically he'd only been dating her to take advantage of her money and wealth, and was in like this whole big scheme to steal everything from her. So
Rude.
she was snubbed by the male race and wants to seek vengeance on all of them. So she adopted Estella as a baby to use her as a weapon against all men, basically.
Oh, okay.
And Pip was
As
the
one
first
does.
victim. Yeah, as one does, you know, create a little monster. So Estella basically drags Pip on this whole time. And while Pip thought that Miss Havisham was his benefactor, all this time he thought, and she meant Estella for me all along, which is very gross language. And
Yeah.
Estella was not meant for anyone. She had free will to choose whoever she wanted to marry. She was just allowed to toy with everybody.
Right.
So Pip was taken advantage of in that respect, but also was his own fault because he fell head over heels in love with her and couldn't see through his rose-colored glasses. As it turns out, the guy who had been Miss Havisham's fiance, the guy he was working with, was the second convict that Pip's convict was beating up that night. Because the one convict knew he was a bad guy, 'cause somehow they had known each other. Turns out Pip's convict was actually Estella's father, and her mother also was like under the care of Mr. Jaggers, not Jeggings. Basically, Mr. Jaggers had given Estella to Miss Havisham for protection because both of her parents were like charged for murder or something like that.
Oh, God.
So that's kind of how they all fit together. Estella ends up like unhappily married, even though she had, you know, the whole world before her, essentially. And poor Miss Havisham eventually does die and is laid out on the table where her wedding cake had been. But then the house is able to move forward. It's no longer stuck in time. And I think that's about it. I'm sorry, I kind of lost it there at the end. It's very complex at the end, though.
Yeah, all the plot threads coming together.
Yeah. But anyway, somehow I managed to get a 5 on an AP class because of that book.
Hell
so
yeah.
I am forever indebted to it.
Thanks, Charles Dickens.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So that was our literary hour with Nerd of the Week.
Heck yeah.
Do you want my quote again?
I would love your quote again.
Okay. It's, "You're a pack of vultures, knives out and beaks bloody. Well, you're not getting bailed out, not this time. She has decided, definitively, not to renounce the inheritance."
Is it from the movie Knives Out?
Yeah!
Okay.
In all the synopses, it says, like, Miss Cabrera was awarded the sole benefactor or beneficiary of
okay.
the will, but they never say the word in the actual movie.
All right, fair enough. I can respect this vibe.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Perfect. Now what?
Now we need the next word. Generator. What will be our next topic for the podcast?
The next word is pie.
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 Oh, no.
That's so good. I was going to say, we can release this on Pi Day, but we're going to be missing that. That's coming up in just like 3 days from now.
Yeah. Oh, that's okay. It'll be the Pi Day episode that's like 2 weeks late. That's okay, though.
Every day can be Pi Day if you put your mind to it.
Every day is Pi Day.
Hey, since every sequence of numbers is apparently in the number pi, every day is Pi Day.
What a revelation. You just blew my mind. Every day is Pi Day. What a beautiful ending to a literary analysis podcast.
That's wonderful. Oh, that makes me so happy.
We have fun here.
All right.
Thanks for making it to the end of the podcast and listening to both of our book reports. If you enjoyed or got a sensible chuckle of listening to us rant about classic literature, feel free to share with a friend and pass it along, even with one person, because then we can grow as a podcast. And that would be awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's all the things. So thanks again for listening. And as always, I've been Stephanie.
And I've been Allison.
And remember, this is still not a pyramid scheme.
It never shall be.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.